President Trump really planning to turn Gaza into a luxury resort? Is this a property play, or is Donald Trump about to entangle the US in a messy, drawn-out rebuild, the very sort he campaigned on ending? This is Ticker Hotshots. Hello, I'm Aaron Young. Great to be with you. Coming up on the program today, Trump's plan stuns the world, and a lot of reaction will be going through that. Banks selling loans for X because there is just so much demand. Also, the new AG on the sanctuary city fight and ordering the DOJ to do more. Plus, Google ditching DEI hiring goals. So much to get through, and to help break it all down, we're joined by Ticker's US Bureau Chief Veronica Dudo.
So much to get through, another busy day.
It certainly is. All right, let's get into it. Donald Trump is back with another bold idea. This one is turning heads right around the world, particularly the Arab world. This is the headline today as Trump envisions a complete transformation of Gaza. Yes, that Gaza into a luxurious destination akin to the Riviera. At the moment, it looks like this. His vision includes relocating Palestinians elsewhere to make way for a sweeping renovation, a redevelopment project. Now, say what you will about Trump, but when he talks about building things, he usually means business. His whole history is about that. The question is, can such an audacious plan ever get off the ground? Here's his announcement standing alongside the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
Now, reporters in the room, as you can imagine, were pretty stunned the first that they had heard of it. There'd been a lot of questions or guessing. What will they announce? What will the priorities be? No one guessed the United States would take ownership of Gaza. A massive foreign policy shift from a man who's been all about America first. What would long-term US control of Gaza even look like? Would it be a strategic play for influence in the region, or a nightmare scenario that could spiral into chaos? Veronica, I know that you don't speak for Trump, but when we have a look at this, it does kind of remind me of what would have been said about going into Afghanistan. There's a small minority group of people who are backing al-Qaeda, who then go and attack the United States, let's say Israel on October 7. Then this idea of bombing Kabul and much of the country to take over, to rebuild. 20 years later, the US leaves with its tail between its legs. Could this be that in one of the most divisive, controversial areas of the entire planet?
So there's a lot of ways to look at this very bold vision. The announcement that we heard during that joint press conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, who became the first foreign leader to visit newly elected President Donald Trump. And so if you look at it on face value, if they're talking about doing this, first of all, so much of that area is already destroyed. It is in rubble. And so it's not that there are a lot of standing structures. Unfortunately, for the Palestinians who are innocent victims there, they don't have running water. Many of them, we're hearing hundreds of thousands potentially have been living in tents. So it's certainly no way to live. And so from a humanitarian standpoint, if, with this proposal that there would be a way to try to rebuild that area and to make a potential region that people could return and live, it does sound very nice. But then if you also look at it as leverage or some type of negotiating tactic, basically you're seeing President Trump saying to the Arab world, you have had generations upon generations to live in peace and to figure this out. And if you can't do it, then I'll come in and do it. And so now they are looking at this. And so you could potentially see them say, well, you know what, maybe we can handle this, or maybe we'll donate and put something together. So this can go in so many different directions. And very oftentimes with President Trump, we do see that he usually has a different type of vision and a bigger plan, usually that is at play, that he doesn't necessarily always publicly announce.
No. Now, this does align with Jared Kushner, who spoke about this kind of Riviera, great port. This should be something akin to what we see in Dubai. The internet already jumping on this with some AI versions of what the Gaza Strip might look like. Some even going further, Veronica, saying this will be Trump Tower Gaza 2030, the beautiful hotel, casino, luxury resort. Now, we joke, but of course in Atlantic City, that's what Trump has been famous for doing, building casinos by the water there, beautiful part of the world, as we know. Many saying don't take him too literally, as is the case. We never know, as you mentioned, what the vision might be. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, has been out kind of walking back some of the comments. Have a look.
What President Trump said yesterday is an acknowledgement of the following. Gaza has been severely damaged. If you look at the aerial imagery, you see what's happening. The billions of dollars that are going to be required for reconstruction are enormous. Some areas have been rendered unlivable now and for the foreseeable future. And so what President Trump announced yesterday is the offer, the willingness of the United States to become responsible for the reconstruction of that area. And while you are rebuilding, while you're clearing debris, by the way, there are unexploded munitions, there are all kinds of Hamas weaponry still buried underground. For people to be able to live in a place safely, all of that has to be removed. It's an enormous undertaking. And the only thing President Trump has done very generously, in my view, is offer the United States willingness to step in, clear the debris, clean the place up from all the destruction that's on the ground, clean it up of all these unexploded munitions. And in the meantime, the people living there will not be able, the people who call that home will not be able to live there while you have crews coming in and removing debris, while you have munitions being removed, etc.
All right, so we had the Headline Act, then the Backup Act to try to explain what the Headline Act was talking about there. And of course it makes sense. Who else is going to rebuild Gaza? Who else is going to clear it away? I think that the key problem are the words about what happens to the Palestinians. Let's have a look at that fireside chat between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump and have a listen closely to what the president says.
It would be my hope that we could do something really nice, really good, where they wouldn't want to return. Why would they want to return? The place has been hell. It's been one of the meanest, toughest places on earth. And right now, I've seen every picture from every angle, better than if I were there. And nobody can live there. You can't live there. So if we can build them through massive amounts of money supplied by other people, very rich nations, and they're willing to supply it. If we can build something for them in one of the countries, and it could be Jordan, it could be Egypt, it could be other countries, and you could build 4 or 5 or 6 areas. It doesn't have to be one area.
All right, President Trump there obviously saying that the United States won't be paying for this. Your thoughts, Veronica, because critics have been out pretty quickly saying what happened to getting away from these sorts of foreign wars that aren't our problem. What are you hearing? What's been the reaction from Republicans from the White House to that sort of criticism?
So it's really interesting when you look at the situation because obviously Donald Trump ran on an American first platform, but he also wants peace, prosperity, and he would like the right thing for other human beings. So when you look at this particular situation in Gaza as to what could really happen, is it just saying that the U.S. could potentially step in and broker a deal if something else isn't really going to happen? But he gets things done, that's for sure. Just in the couple of weeks when we looked at, Venezuela and some of the other Latin countries not wanting to take some of the migrants, they're now taking them. The same with the north and south border of the United States. Canada and Mexico agreed to all of his terms. We'll be sending troops. So he certainly is very skilled in terms of getting his deals done. But what is the end result? I'm not sure what he's thinking. I don't know a lot of people, maybe even if they know or where this goes. But, he is talking to a lot of leaders in the Middle East, some also next week from Jordan. There are going to be more people coming into the White House. And so when we did listen to the press secretary today, Caroline Leavitt, she said that this is not something that he just pulled out of thin air, that he has been thoughtfully discussing this. U.S. So that leads me to wonder, have there been some conversations behind the scenes that haven't been made public yet with some of these other potential stakeholders? So unfortunately, as much as I wish I kind of knew what was going to happen in the future, it's more of one of those stories where we'll definitely stay on it and kind of see what happens.
Look, we already know some stuff, right? We know that Egypt is saying that they won't be taking Palestinians. They said that weeks ago. We know that Saudi Arabia is firmly against this, and Saudi Arabia and Jared Kushner and the Trumps meant to have a really good relationship. Let's have a listen to some reaction now. Here's Ron Paul.
He was talking as if this was a hurricane on the Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
How are we going to help people
get them out of there? Yeah.
No, that is not encouraging. But that whole thing might backfire, and might be maybe what Netanyahu is thinking. Yeah, this is great, but maybe it's a little too much too fast. Yeah. Maybe it's a little and too much for the American people.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a little and too much for the Committee to Government Efficiency, because he admits that we're going to be involved.
You got to ask, what would Doge be thinking about this kind of spending of money if it does come down to the US? Although Trump says that others will be paying for it. What do the Democrats think of all of this? Have a look.
It is very clear that what the president talked about would make our country less safe. An invasion of U.S. troops into Gaza would not make Americans more safe. It would make Americans a target. But this is very clear. I mean, I'm going to just take a wild guess that the president's plans include, hotels and resorts and casinos. Like, that's just who he is. But it is not. This is not a thoughtful strategy that would keep Americans safe.
All right, so just quickly on the allies before we move on, I think about Australia, and this is a shocking wedge for Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, who has had to walk a tightrope in Australia on this issue since October 7, a few years back now, where for the Labor Party here, they have an election coming up not too long away, and they've been talking about a two-state solution, as we even heard Penny Wong, the foreign minister here, talking about that not so long ago. That has been Australian policy. Also, the same for Keir Starmer in the UK as well. Donald Trump doesn't just have to try and get support, obviously, from the community in the region of the Middle East. He also needs to keep it from his allies because, as we heard Ron Paul say, this isn't a hurricane off the East Coast. This is an area which has been at war since the 1940s. Everyone wants this area, and I guess a lot of people will be wondering, will the US rebuild and then hand it over to Israel? We don't know. As you've said, this is a story going ahead, but what are your views on how the world has reacted to this?
So I think a lot of people have been completely shocked. They weren't really sure what to say. I think disbelief, but then also, well, is he serious, or is this some type of bargaining chip or leverage, or, what is the ultimate end game? I think that is a better way to try to think when it comes to Donald Trump. He obviously authored the book, The Art of the Deal. He loves negotiating, so we do know that. He's also a very successful real estate developer, and so he does talk about the potential of that region being, quite beautiful. But a lot of experts have been saying it's going to take at least 10 to 15 years to even, search the bombs, detonate them safely, remove the rubble. I mean, this is not something that is going to happen in a couple of months or even a couple of years. So there's a long road ahead to see, especially which direction this will go in.
Yeah, very much so. All right, let's move on. Banks have sold $5.5 billion of loans tied to social media company X, formerly known as Twitter. This is a headline from the Wall Street Journal today. It comes as the company's CEO reassures investors about its improving financial health after a challenging period following the acquisition by Elon Musk back in 2022. The platform has begun regaining interest from major advertisers like Amazon. Now, the initial plan was to sell $3 billion of debt, but heightened demand led to a larger deal. I'm quite confused. Why does X need to sell debt in the first place?
So this is really interesting because if you remember not too long ago when Elon Musk pledged his support for Donald Trump, so many people said they would leave the X platform. They wanted nothing to do with it. Shortly, it would kind of be run into the ground. When we're really seeing quite the opposite in these financial dealings. Amazon is talking about potentially running some ads on there, as are some other companies. And so, people are now betting on Elon Musk and also the social social media platform X, we're also seeing, a better standpoint from Wall Street. They are having more of a bullish outlook moving forward. And so, it seems to be good news, but, something else that will be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, interesting because he's been suing a lot of these big companies as well. And you'd have to think about how poor old Bob Iger would be feeling at the Walt Disney Company, who was one of the most adamant pulling out of X because of comments that Elon Musk had made at the time. I think it was about Israel at the time. There's been so many controversies, it's hard to keep up. But now, obviously, Bob Iger and Disney have to deal with the Republican administration. We know that things didn't go too well too recently when Bob Chapek, as CEO, picked a fight with the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, that Bob Iger was brought in to clean up. But now Bob Iger finds himself in a bit of a feud, a public feud, with the man who is the right-hand man of President Trump, being Elon Musk, who happens to own X. What has happened recently with a lot of these different big American companies who jumped on the bandwagon to get off X, that Musk is now sued because of this? What are your thoughts?
So legally, if there are breaches of contracts, and that, clearly will be left to the judges in those different precincts as to reviewing these cases moving forward. But we have seen a lot of times it may take some time for it to move through the courts, but they are able to win. And so if they believe that the law is on their side, it's something that Elon Musk has not shied away from. He feels steadfast in that. So, in terms of what those damages potentially could be, or how that shakes out, still very interesting. When we look at social media, even though it's been around for a while now, we are still seeing some things that are a bit unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge turnaround story for X to go from being on the verge of bankruptcy. You think about the thousands of employees at Twitter's headquarters in San Francisco that were fired shortly after Elon Musk rocked up holding everything, including the kitchen sink, the famous image, as he arrived there. And he's been working furiously to try and turn the company around. He brought in the former head of advertising from NBC Universal as well. Where is X at the moment? Because it feels like it still is Elon Musk's playground, but also it has been a testing stage where Donald Trump's administration could watch how he went and say, yep, that's what we need for the whole federal government, and using the turnaround of X as proof that you can do more with less.
Well, that certainly has been Elon Musk's business model when it comes to X. He made it very public who he let go, who stayed on, and how things were being run. He really wanted to respond back to the people. We've continuously heard from users who would say they would be shadow banned or their content would be blocked when it was not breaking any of the rules, just that it had maybe a different type of value system, potentially more conservative, or if they were trying to just, question the status quo, whether it was something about research or, something in the medical world. So we have just seen such an influx of more people spending time on there. So it's been something to certainly watch. And as you mentioned, doing more with less, that is something that we have seen Elon Musk do in terms of turning around X.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at the time everyone thought this will be a disaster. He overpaid. We knew he didn't really want it. He said he wanted it and then he tried to pull back, but a court made him, and therefore he decided he'll do it. The banks helped him out to the tune of billions of dollars, and that's what they're now selling these to try and get that money back. They were doing $3 billion. It's now gone to $5 billion, and it's a pretty successful story given how bad it could have been. I remember signing up to other platforms and downloading all my data because the news told me that it's quite likely that Twitter won't survive the weekend. Do you remember that? And also the fact that Twitter X has survived despite the plethora of all of these kind of copycat platforms. We think of Threads. What's the blue one? Is it called Blue Hair, or is that just the people who moved across to there? Because there was a group of people who were anti-Republican, anti-Trump, anti-X, who all went across, but yet the banks still massive demand, 97 cents in the dollar for this $5 billion of debt. It is a big story, and we will continue to follow it here on Ticker. The new US Attorney General Pam Bondi has announced significant changes on her first day leading the Justice Department, including an order to pause federal funding for sanctuary cities. This is a big deal, and this is the headline from the New York Post. She's committed to combating the misuse of the legal system and also requiring prosecutors to seek the death penalty in suitable cases, especially focusing on violent drug trafficking. Bondi plans to establish the Weaponization Working Group to investigate past law enforcement actions for political bias, including high-profile cases against Donald Trump. Here she is, of course, being sworn in not so long ago. A big moment with Donald Trump slightly to the left there, off camera, but you can see as this is all taking place. Give us an idea who Pam Bondi is.
Sure. So Pam Bondi, she has spent her career in law enforcement and, of course, as an attorney from Florida. She really went after the drug cartels, and she is a staunch supporter of trying to get people rounded up who break the law when it comes to human trafficking. So that is something that, clearly falls very much in line with President Donald Trump and, of course, his new Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, as we see these ICE raids continue. And so, when it comes to that human trafficking, it's something that, she has given that directive to move forward because it is such a massive issue, not just in the United States, but really around the world. But what's so fascinating here on day one is she is pulling the federal funding for sanctuary cities, because if you are a sanctuary city, for example, like New York or Los Angeles, and you're getting federal funding, and you say that if ICE officers come into the city, we will not cooperate and help with them, even if one of these illegal migrants are already in the prison, they will not help them with this information or allow them access. And so why, the Attorney General is saying that should federal funds be going to these sanctuary cities who are staunchly against what the government is trying to do in terms of safety. So I'm sure that will be legally challenged at some point. But additionally, she has started this weaponization working group, and they will be looking at cases, and they're trying to determine whether or not it was a weaponization of the law and that it was done for a political reason. Specifically, she's going to be looking at the attorney Alvin Bragg and, of course, special counsel Jack Smith and the New York Attorney General Letitia James. And clearly they all went after her boss, Donald Trump. And so that will be very fascinating to see, because most likely we will be hearing from Democrats to say that this was a directive and, that she's only doing this to gain favor with her boss. But it's not just about Donald Trump. She's also going after several Catholics in the United States, and also parents. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, targeted a lot of these groups, so Catholics and also parents at PTA meetings, saying that they were, in some way harmful to society. And we've seen that through memos that were leaked. So, this is part of this idea from this new administration to say they wanted to take politics, out of the law and to just, simply pursue what's right and wrong. So it will be interesting to see with these working groups what the outcome will be.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Jack Smith. I mean, he won't be looking for a sanctuary city. He'll probably be looking for a sanctuary country anytime soon. Now, the idea of pulling federal funding, is it really going to happen? I mean, I know that she's announced it on day one of her new term as the Attorney General, but, when we look into what does federal funding go to, it's critical programs funded by the federal dollars, including public safety initiatives, disaster relief, housing support, and healthcare services. If there is a disaster, let's say a hurricane somewhere, or perhaps even a massive wildfire in Los Angeles, is the federal government really not going to assist, and what impact could that have?
So it's very curious to say what is behind this. Is it just that they are taking a tough stance to say they mean business? We'll cut the funding if you don't cooperate, and then potentially these sanctuary cities cooperate, and then the funding is restored. Clearly, if there is some type of federal emergency, the government will be able to fund them somehow, even if it's not under this federal funding. They could put it under emergency funding. So, what's the end result here? I think that they're looking for cooperation from these sanctuary cities, specifically for these raids of illegal criminal migrants. So that will be very interesting to see what happens, because, as I mentioned, I am sure that the paperwork is already being drawn out to, somehow legally sue or try to stop this potential initiative from being enacted.
Another big story today I just want to briefly touch on because it's somewhat connected. But here's Donald Trump surrounded by school children announcing and signing an executive order preventing transgender women from competing in female categories of sport. So the order provides guidance, regulations, legal interpretations, and will enlist the Department of Education, a department that he wants to go, to investigate these high schools thought to be non-compliant. Now, Republicans say that it restores fairness to sport. LGBT advocacy groups, human rights organisations describing the move as discriminatory. We know that this is a really difficult subject for a lot of people. It has been a subject, the trans issue, you would say, has really been one that has changed a lot of minds when it comes to DEI in the workplace as well. For some, it went too far. Just looking at these images, Veronica, what are your thoughts seeing President Trump surrounded by children signing an executive order like this?
So if you listen to a lot of the female athletes, some of which were in either college or some went on to try to make it into the Olympics, they have talked about how they felt in this situation, saying that, oftentimes if they were in locker rooms or needing to shower, that they felt uncomfortable. And also just biologically looking at muscle mass, comparing someone who is female versus someone who, was born biologically male, that, so much can be different in terms of muscle and tissue and what they're able to do. And so they have put a very compelling and more what they're calling a common sense approach to this, saying that females should be the ones who are competing. And of course, as you mentioned, we have heard pushback from that. And as we've talked about before with executive orders, these EOs, depending on who's in the EOs, you can, with the power of the pen, do things, but then with the power of the pen, you can undo things. So we do know President Trump has called on Congress to take up this issue. So that will be something to watch to see, what lawmakers will do and if they will officially make this law of the land moving forward. They would clearly, need to have to put a proposal out there and vote.
Google is scrapping its diversity hiring targets and reviewing its diversity, equity and inclusion programs. We are talking DEI. This is the headline in the Wall Street Journal, and it's a big deal for another big company. The move aligns with tech giants and other Silicon Valley firms reassessing their DEI commitments. The decision comes after a previously set goal in 2020 to boost leadership representation of underrepresented groups that's now been dropped. Now, despite these changes, Google assures that it will maintain resource groups for underrepresented employees and also continue expanding offices in diverse areas. Veronica, I guess the issue with this topic is it feels so political. It feels like when one party's in, all these big companies try and say, yes, 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 we really care. And then when another party's in, they say, oh, no, we're not really into it anymore. In fact, out it goes. And we might even get our CEO to turn up to the inauguration of the president. Here's a question. If Kamala Harris had won the election, do you think that these big companies like Google and others that we have seen, Walmart too, Target, would be ending their DEI programs the same way that we've seen them do under Trump?
Probably not, and for what would be the reason to reverse and to make these announcements. It would be fascinating to try to talk to the heads of these companies and to say, what are your hiring practices? Is it based on merit? Do you want the best engineers out there to try to put together these programs and to work for you or not? That's the question. And so now we're seeing, as you mentioned, this reversal. And it's unfortunate for not only Americans, but I think all citizens around the world. As you mentioned, they feel very much kind of like a ping pong going back and forth, depending on which administration, which party is the one in power, is the one
that's
in
exactly my
office.
point. It feels just so unfair for the innocent people who are, if you think about the people that DEI is trying to help, and regardless of your viewpoints on whether DEI should even exist in the first place, anything which is trying to help somebody, there is some merit to it, even if there is a broader debate about the impact that that has on others as well. And you feel for those people, you have to, just as we feel for the white male who gets overlooked as well. It's not that we choose one side or another, it's just troubling that politics can have such a massive impact on companies, or that companies essentially try and curry favour with administrations. But I guess that probably is nothing new. It's just that we have the means to talk about it and to notice these things in greater detail. Or is it something new? Is this, you've been around as long as I have as a journalist looking at these sorts of things. When things went from, say, Clinton to Bush in 2000, when it went from Bush to Obama, did we see companies react the same way they have over the past few months?
Well, I think when you look at this specific issue, because people were just practically racing each other to get to the forefront or to get in front of a camera to say that they were going to be having these DEI initiatives and, that they want to be fair. And so they made it a point. These companies, worked very hard and put together public relation campaigns and videos, and they wanted to kind of shove it down everyone's throat to say that they were doing it. And then now, as you said, yes, it's a complete reversal and they're backpedaling. So maybe if they didn't try to get that media attention, we wouldn't be talking about it. Is it new? I think with social media, people are able to have these conversations, because if you think about it, during the Clinton era and the Bush era, it was, we didn't see social media. So you had to rely on newspapers and you had to rely on that evening news. And so now with streaming, a lot of regular people can watch these press conferences. So people can watch Apple, in June when they have their big announcements. So people have access to information that they didn't before, and they can see with their own eyes and certainly be making, forming their own opinions too about what they're saying.
Yeah, and one of the opinions I've heard over recent days as well is it really all began with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter, which sparked a lot of corporations that were falling over themselves to announce diversity policies to try and prevent similar incidents happening again and to try and help people in more diverse communities as well. The question is whether that was a legitimate care or, again, being seen to be doing something without putting enough thought into it. What are your views on that?
For sure. Is it exploitation or not? In the long run, was this successful? Obviously, in the U.S., we have seen through the years with, the civil rights movement, of course, with having more females in the workplace. So it's not something new, in talking about some of these groups just to level the playing field and to say, what's going on. But, it's really interesting now. We are such a global world in that, people are constantly moving around and, we have a lot of diversity. And so how does this factor into the hiring practice moving forward? And also, that company culture, it will be interesting to see now with some of these reversals. Now we're seeing Google, we've seen others, kind of what it's going to be like moving forward. It will be interesting to see. Yeah,
and also you really touched on a great point just to finish up about workplaces are naturally more diverse. If you think about Silicon Valley, where there was quite often a left-leaning agenda to be able to hire more people of diverse backgrounds. Well, if you go through Silicon Valley, you do see a lot of software engineers who are immigrants from countries like India, for example, because they love and have massive education systems based on software development. And when these companies scale up, they needed people all of a sudden, and they would take them from anywhere. They would take them from everywhere. It wasn't so much about trying to force people to fit within a box, to tick a box, but rather naturally it happened because there was a requirement and a fulfillment as well. Anyway, we better leave it there. Veronica Dudo, host of In America Today, thanks for joining us as always.
Thanks.